King Theoden of Rohan is one of the most impressive characters throughout the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But what is it that makes him so compelling? Is it his badass armor? His love of death? The fact he doesn't eat tomatoes like a lobotomy patient? Or is it because he has one of the most powerful and fascinating character arcs of redemption, everlasting hope, and eternal victory? In fact, I would go as far to say it is Theoden who becomes the kingly role model Aragorn always needed, but at the cost of a harrowing tale.
Dude, really?
When we are first introduced to Theoden, we meet an elderly, feeble, and ineffectual ruler and puppet to Saruman.
You have no power here, Gandalf the Grey.
Theoden appears completely incoherent. He doesn't even react to his own son's death and irrationally signs the orders to banish his own kin and most loyal commander from Rohan. He is unrecognizable to his family, friends, and even his own people. In this part of his life, Theoden has fallen to an all-time low.
What are you talking about? Hell, I think he's never looked better.
You see, the peace that Theoden won for his kingdom in his youth had made him complacent and weak, which was the opening that his enemies needed. Theoden's fall through the influence of Saruman through Grima Wormtongue was a failure of will, and his recovery, while encouraged by Gandalf, can be interpreted as a resurrection of will. Theoden is bewitched by one wizard and freed by another, but this is only the start to his character transformation.
Oh, I'm quivering in my boots.
Once returning to his former self, Theoden is served the king's sword and his eyes lay rest on Grima. His first thought is that of vengeance towards his once trusted advisor. However, Theoden's impulsive public execution is interrupted by Aragorn. We'll get more into the dynamic of these two role models later, but the result of this is Theoden is viewed as a merciful and cautious leader, both by his people and the audience.
I'd bow too if he came out in his bathrobe and a sword, looking like the dude from the Big Lebowski.
Yeah, well, that's just like, your opinion, man.
Yes, my lord, I live to serve you but the finest of bush light. Rohirrim, bring forth the royal 30-pack. His Majesty awaits his pre-game drinking.
And once Theoden composes himself, he looks to those around him and asks,
Where is my son?
He learns of his son's tragic death and we get a glimpse of his grief.
No parent should have to bury their child.
Theoden processes what he can at the funeral, but understands there will be another time to grieve for his son. When contrasted with Denethor, steward of Gondor, who also loses his son in the same fashion, we begin to understand that Theoden is not your average king and leader. For right now, he has more important matters to attend, his people. He learns that Saruman has betrayed him more than just enslaving his body and mind. He's aligned with Sauron and has an army of orcs and men attacking the Westfold, burning as they go.
Hell yeah.
Edoras is no longer safe. It will fall and burn just as the Westfold, and he must get his people to safety. He orders the evacuation to Helm's Deep because he understands Edoras can be rebuilt, but his people cannot be replaced.
Yeah, you humans make everything the old-fashioned way, when you could just as easily be making people out of sacks of mud.
These internal struggles lay heavy on his mind. His son, the people who have betrayed him, and the looming threat of battle and death that lay ahead for his people.
Symbolmuna. Ever has it grown on the tombs of my forebears.
Now it shall cover the grave of my son. Alas, that these evil days should be mine.
As an experienced tactician in war, Theoden is confident that the stone fortress in Helm's Deep is the safest place for his people.
Saruman's arm will have grown long indeed if he thinks he can reach us here.
On their journey to refuge, they're ambushed by a cavalry of warg riders. His first command is to his trusted shield maiden, and also niece, is to get the women and children to low ground. Éowyn reluctantly concedes. This is to provide the women and children more cover, and they can obviously move more swiftly downhill while the riders of Rohan engage the orcs in combat. He does all he can to ensure his people's survival, even putting himself on the front line to defend them. Theoden still loses countless warriors in this battle, but his people are safe. From his perspective, his losses are great, but they could be much worse.
So few of you have returned.
Our people are safe.
And I think it's also important to note that Theoden directs his men to leave the dead after this battle, but this was not a decision made lightly. You can see the pain in his eyes as these soldiers were loyal and gave their lives defending his people, but there is no more he can do for them now. Again, there will be another time to grieve for the dead. For now, he must care for the living.
Hail the victorious dead!
They arrive in the quite dilapidated Hornburg, but this is where they must take their stand against Saruman and his forces. Theoden is shocked and completely demoralized when he learns how large a force Saruman is sending. That, in combination with his own losses, he is facing 10,000 Uruk-hai with 300 soldiers.
How did it come to this?
But Theoden does not despair in front of his men.
Let them come. I want every man and strong lad, able to bear arms, to be ready for battle by nightfall. We will cover the causeway and the gate from above. No army has ever breached the Deeping Wall, or set foot inside the Hornburg.
He understands his men's morale is of the utmost importance if they're to have any chance at all, even if he himself finds it hopeless.
What would you have me do? Look at my men. Their courage hangs by a thread. If this is to be our end, then I would have them make such an end as to be worthy of remembrance.
He resents that none have come to his aid and accepts that they are alone.
We are not so lucky in our friends as you. The old alliances are dead.
With no one left to come, Theoden does what he can to swell his ranks by enlisting every boy of fighting age into combat, another decision that was not made lightly. As for the women and children, he made sure they were put out of harm's way in a protected area of the fortress. In contrast with Denethor, who didn't even remove his people from the first level when the Battle of Pelennor Fields began, Denethor's motives were only for himself and his grief, something that could have easily fallen upon Theoden. Theoden is already suffering just as much loss against greater odds, but his integrity holds him to a higher standard.
Those boys have had at least 8 years to prepare for combat. The Uruks have had 2 weeks since birth. As for the women and younglings, only the most savage and corrupt cultures voluntarily include their women in combat. Even orcs wouldn't sink that low. Would we?
Elves do come to defend the people of Rohan, and Theoden finds that they still honor an alliance from thousands of years ago. This is important because it sparks hope into the man's heart once more. With enough elven warriors to defend the Deeping Wall, Theoden fortifies his own people within the Hornburg, being the safest place for them. And while I criticize the elves' placement and some other tactics in this video here, Theoden is doing what he believes is best for his people. Nonetheless, we see his background as a tactician come into play, and it might have actually went well had the fires of Orthanc and the Orc Olympic Torch Runner not been present. And this is when the battle sways into enemy favor. The Deeping Wall is breached, and while the elves die still trying to defend it, Theoden puts all of his emphasis on fortifying the front gate of the Hornburg. Yet again, putting himself on the front line, he is injured this time by a spear, sending his soldiers into a frenzy. The wall is eventually battered down, and Theoden has no choice but order the retreat to inside the Hornburg's halls. Theoden again falls into despair, knowing his defenses have failed, and it's only a matter of time before all are lost.
The fortress is taken. It is over.
His will has again failed, and he ceases all commands. Instead, he is completely disturbed by all that has transpired.
So much death. What can men do against such reckless hate? Ride out and meet them.
And Aragorn appeals to death and glory, a final stand against the enemy without fear and with honor. Theoden leads the charge to face their adversaries and gives the enemy no satisfaction. When they reach the end of the causeway, Theoden is met by the sight of Gandalf on the hilltop and 3,000 Rohan riders thought to be leagues away. Theoden learns from both the elves and Gandalf that there is always hope, even when it's most unlikely, that the righteousness of allies can still be trusted. The orcs are driven off and a vengeful forest makes quick work of the disorderly Yeerks remaining.
I gotta be honest, it wasn't the Rohirrim we found so frightening. It was those grand damn horses. Those things are weird as hell looking. Ugh. They scared the hell out of me.
The victory at Helm's Deep does not belong to you, Theoden, Horsemaster. You are a lesser son of greater science.
With nothing left to do but confront Saruman for his crimes, Theoden finds it difficult to compose himself. Gandalf wishes that Saruman speaks about Sauron's plans, but Theoden cannot control his outbursts, thinking of everything his people lost to such an arrogant and greedy slimebag.
When you hang from a gibbet for the sport of your own crows, we shall have peace.
This results in Saruman withholding even more about Sauron until his eventual accident.
Honestly, if Grima hadn't done it, we would have when we got back. Saruman was such a dick. Nothing but maggoty bread? Look at this man's pantry. We were on the cusp of mutiny anyways.
Aragorn and Gandalf discuss their next plan of action, and Theoden is still resentful of those who did not lend him aid.
Tell me, why should we ride to the aid of those who did not come to ours?
His loyalty is to his people and providing them attention, assurance, and conservation. Of course, once the beacons of Gondor were lit, a signal that is a plea for help was received. Theoden is called upon, and knowing what it's like to be alone during such an onslaught, Theoden upholds his character to honor his alliance with Gondor. Theoden arrives late with his cavalry, but in formation, and Theoden displays more of his skills as a tactician and cavalry leader during this fight.
Imagine a king who fights his own battles. Wouldn't that be a sight?
The king leads the charge on the front lines once again into enemy forces. As you can imagine, if the king feels secure in fighting to the death on the front lines, then so will his soldiers. There is no challenge on the field of battle Theoden will not face along your side.
Now for wrath. We have victory! Now for ruin. And the red dawn.
For Theoden is a kindly and inspirational king. His rally cries and speeches are enough to motivate any soldier and send chills down the audience's spine.
For Theoden! Rise! Arise, riders of Theoden! The horn of Helm Hammerhand shall sound in the deep one last time. Spears shall be shaken! Shields shall be splintered!
This be the hour when we draw swords together.
A sword day! A red day! And the sun rises!
His most powerful speech takes place in the Battle of Pelennor Fields when he fires up his thousands of Rohirrim before charging into tens of thousands of orcs. The conclusion of his speech was simply,
You know what? Theoden is pretty epic.
he is also a kindly king to those who come before him. He befriends Merry when he really didn't have any reason to do so. He just didn't know how brave hobbits can be. He even offers compassion to the man who's in part responsible for most of his grief.
Grima, come down. You need not follow him. You are not always as you are now. You were once a man of Rohan. Be free of him.
For all these reasons, I truly believe that Theoden is the role model Aragorn needed to accept his duty as the rightful king of Gondor. He showed Aragorn what an honorable king should be, even if Aragorn was the catalyst at times. Theoden's struggles are those of a man whose will has failed, and yet he finds redemption again and again. Tolkien says that redemption is a key point of his theology and the nature of creation in Middle-earth, and I believe 𝐑𝐥𝐞 portrayed this exceptionally well in Theoden. Theoden is a symbol of everlasting hope, even when it's impossible to see.
I know your face. Heroine.
Sadly, Theoden ultimately dies by the fell beasts of an evil king, but he died with honor in one of the greatest battles of all free people, defending the fate of all Middle-earth, and in that, Theoden seized eternal victory.
I go to my fathers, in whose mighty company I shall not now feel ashamed.
Gandalf expected Theoden to be freed as an elderly king to lead his people to safety, but Theoden becomes a strong, willful, and tragic war hero. Perhaps Gandalf does not know the power of his own healing. I think it's obvious that Theoden is my favorite character because he is more than just a role model of a good man. He exemplifies a leader who will die for his people and put their interests first, even when grief and despair is at its strongest. And he teaches Aragorn a lesson he desperately needed, that no matter how far one falls, redemption of yourself and others is never out of reach. It's like I tell my children, what happens when you watch Lord of the Rings?
Make us better people!
Where now the horse and the rider? Where is the horn that was blowing? Where is the helm and the hauberk, and the bright hair flowing? They have passed like rain on the mountain.